Is going to be Dina. She's going to talk about the network design, which really follows well after this. She's a physical scientist with EPA Region 9 in the Air Quality Office, and she's a geographic lead for CARB in San Joaquin Valley and San Luis Obispo County. And welcome her to the room.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Dina. I'm on the monitoring team in the Air Quality Analysis Office. And like Craig mentioned, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into network design today. So Rome and your monitoring networks weren't built in a day, but what goes into operating and designing a robust ambient air monitoring network? And what sorts of things should you be considering in establishing and maintaining a network that meets the needs of multiple different stakeholders under, I'm sure you're all aware of, very limited resources? So Craig showed this figure. This is the California Ozone Network. It's a very large ambient air quality network, one of the biggest in the countries, and it's made up of a diverse number of monitoring organizations, both big and small. And today I'm hoping to touch on several topics that I hope will help guide you through making decisions for designing and operating your network, whether you be a small district with 1 or 2 people or a large district with 20 or more sites. And I'm going to touch on balancing resources and priorities, the annual network plan and network assessment process a little bit more, and how you can use them as tools, meeting minimum monitoring requirements, making network changes and things you should consider for both small and large changes, and also touching on everyone's favorite sensors and non-regulatory monitoring at the end. So networks have to address several different dynamic needs from often competing stakeholders, and it's often a difficult balancing act under very limited resources. And I threw up a few examples of different priorities you probably are considering, and those include money, resources, time, changes in population, trying to run a bunch of different multi-pollutant sites, very long-term data sets, meeting federal and state minimum monitoring requirements, community needs, and also political pressure in some situations. And I'm going to dig a little bit more into the federal monitoring requirements. So 40 CFR Part 58 covers the ambient air quality surveillance regs. And if people aren't familiar with that, well, I guess I'm glad you're here if you're not familiar with that. So I'm going to talk about that, which houses all of the ambient air monitoring regs and how we report the ambient air monitoring data and other information. And Appendix D of that part specifically deals with network design criteria. Appendix E deals with more locational criteria, so probe and monitor siting, and then 40 CFR 5810 deals with annual monitoring network plans and network assessments. Okay, so to talk a bit more about annual network plans, they're due July 1st to us each year. Most of your plans are probably going through public comment at this point, I hope. They require extensive coordination and communication between monitoring agencies, EPA, and the public, and they include a wealth of information about your network. So site lists, photographs, satellite maps, EPA approval letters, details about recent or proposed network changes, public and EPA comments to things that have been going on with your network, and sometimes data analyses, depending on what's happening. And EPA posts all the final plans at this link, and I included it because I think if you're having lunch one day and want to take a peek, it's really interesting to see what different agencies across the countries are doing in their plans and how they're representing their networks. And you might come up with some pretty good tips or tricks for how to do your plans as well, so I wanted to include that. And as Craig mentioned, our review is rather extensive. I think you're all familiar with our checklist. And so we go through a detailed checklist to assess whether you're meeting the monitoring requirements in your plans. And we look at the minimum CFR network requirements. We look at any system modifications. So are you shutting down sites? Are you going to put up a new site? Are you relocating a site? Have your sampling frequency changes? Do you have any sampling frequency changes because of different concentrations you've measured? How's your continuous PM 2.5 network look? Are your monitors in compliance? And if not, why? The SO2 data requirements rule is something we look at. Also susceptible and vulnerable populations for NO2. And finally, we look at resource saving opportunities. And so what opportunities, like Mike mentioned, are there for resource saving in terms of monitoring? And what kind of additional monitoring needs might be coming up for you? Okay, so this table looks very familiar to Craig's, but I do have a couple, things to complement what he said. So the annual network plans are due annually. The network assessments are due every 5 years, with one coming up in 2020. Our approval and public comment is required for network plans, especially when you include network modifications with your plan, as often you guys do. The network assessments are also submitted as part of the annual network plan process the following year. So that does technically go through the public comment and approval process through that mechanism. And like we mentioned with the checklist, there's extensive content requirements for the annual network plan, and we go through those checklists for each of your plans, whereas the network assessment is a bit more flexible. Oh, you have a Java update. So the network plans are a bit more flexible. There's things you can talk about that might be more relevant to your networks, like new technologies you're interested in testing, or new communities of interest, things like that. But like Craig mentioned, it's really up to you. How can you can use this as a tool. So we don't have a lot of specific requirements. The applicability period for annual network plans are relatively short. It's an 18-month window into your network and what's going on with it. Whereas the network assessment is much a longer time frame, and we expect it to be very forward-looking, several years into the future. Okay, so to talk more about minimum monitoring requirements, so in your annual network plans, you're required to address minimum monitoring requirements for each of the individual criteria pollutants, and also your networks like NCORE and Near Road. And so the minimum monitoring requirements are based on a variety of information, including the population of your MSA, your metropolitan statistical area, or core-based statistical area in some cases, and also pollution concentrations. So this table is organized, I don't know if I have a pointer, but this table is organized with the MSA in the left column at different population categories, and then different concentration levels relative to the NAC. So high concentration, medium concentration, low concentration, and then the number of sites in there. And so I chose an example for PM10 to go through together to look at PM10 minimum monitoring requirements. And so let's do Sacramento. So the Sacramento MSA has about 2.3 million people, and they have a high concentration of 149 micrograms per meter cubed. And so this falls out over 80% of the NACs for PM10. So how many sites, based on this information, what are their minimum monitoring requirements for PM10? I can't hear. Anybody want to yell? 40. Okay, great. Yes, 4 to 8. And so I also wanted to throw up the example using PM10 because I know quite a few of you may have data impacted by recent air quality events like wildfires. And so, for your annual network plans, you might have been seeing things on the checklist like, hey, include a footnote, make sure you address the information in your plan that how many sites are required. But if you think your data are being impacted by things like wildfire, include a footnote in your checklist, in your annual network plan, and just note that you think the data might be impacted by wildfire activity. So that's how, just to answer any questions about that for some agencies that I know have been seeing some higher PM10 levels than they're used to. Okay, so a lot of agencies have more than the minimum monitor requirements out there, and while quality is the most important thing, what quality is often more important than the quantity of monitors, there are reasons for you to go beyond the minimum monitoring requirements, and those might include state and federal planning actions, community needs or requests for additional monitoring, emergency monitoring, so wildfires, things like that, and other federal requirements. So we require like max concentration sites and background and transportation sites and PM 2.5 continuous monitoring. So we ask you to do a lot more than the minimum monitoring requirements in some situations. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about network changes. So you're ready to make a change, and it could be as small as replacing, an instrument with a new method, or something really bad has happened and you need to replace an entire site. And so, there's a lot of reasons for changes, and that could be your equipment's getting pretty old, your sampling frequency requirements have changed, the population has changed, affecting your requirements. Maybe you're getting kicked out of your building or the property you're on, or there's some extensive shelter damage. And we've seen all of this and have helped folks through these changes. So what should you be considering before making a change, whether it's large or small? What's your motivation? Why are you doing it? What resources or support will be needed? Do you have the staff, the time, the money to make the change? What are you going to do with the data? How are you going to use it, submit it, certify it? Who's going to do that? What are the roles and responsibilities for data management? How is it impacting your monitoring, your minimum monitoring requirements? Co-location. Are you switching from an FRM to an FEM? Are you going to stick a T640 in there? So, it's good to think about how that affects co-location for your PM networks. Are all your staff trained up on any new instrumentation or methods? Are people ready, and do they understand how to operate these monitors? And EPA approval, do you have the approval requirements? And so, we don't require approval for things like method changes per se, but if you're gonna shut down a site or relocate it or something, major, you need to go through a formal approval process with us. And also notify CARB of any upcoming change, and work with your PQAO liaisons, because that's what they're there for. So they're great resources for you to reach out to as well. Okay, so if you're going to embark on a larger network change, what are some things that you should consider in this case? And these are things that we consider at the EPA when we see a major network change coming through. Are you meeting the attainment or maintenance plan requirements, if applicable? Is anything like that going on with your monitoring site? What's the probability of the pollutants at the site exceeding 80% of the NAAQS in the 3 years? Because that impacts things. Are your Appendix D requirements met? Are you dealing with a max concentration site? Again, how is it impacting minimum monitoring requirements? Also, co-location requirements. If you're adding a new method or you're taking away a monitor, is that going to shift things around? And then in some cases, doing a data analysis, looking at attainment in the last 5 years, just to see how your trends are looking in the last 5 years and what you think it's going to look like in the future. Those things are all really important to consider. Okay. So non-regulatory monitoring has become a bit of a hot topic. And so, what non-regulatory monitors can be very helpful in certain situations to complement your regulatory network. So for example, community monitoring needs or wildfire emergency response monitoring. So the examples I have up here are the IVAN PM monitoring network around the Salton Sea, and then the bottom right is the AQ-SPEC Purple Air PM sensor network, and it's showing concentrations during a wildfire event, so the canyon fire. And in these cases, these non-regulatory monitors are providing broader spatial and temporal resolution and useful information for the public, so they know and understand, how they might make some different behavioral decisions. But, and this is a big but, we still have issues interpreting sensor data and communicating it effectively to the public. So if you're considering using these kinds of monitors to complement your regulatory network, it's really good to consider all of these things before putting them out there, because once you put them out there, you can't go back. So. And EPA has been working on sensors guidance. They have a very active sensors program. I encourage you all to look at the EPA Air Sensors Toolkit online. But here are our general talking points right now for sensors. Regulatory grade data is still required as the sole basis for NAAQS decisions. So sensors are not expected to be used as the sole basis for any planning actions or NAAQS decisions, but non-regulatory or secondary data is what we call it, has been used in the past, even before sensors were, the dawn of sensors, to inform boundaries for non-attainment areas, support additional monitoring in areas of concern, provide supporting evidence for exceptional event demonstrations. So all of these things, we have incorporated secondary data into some regulatory decisions in the past. And so guidance is currently being discussed to clarify, appropriate uses and applications of sensor data. And I think a lot of you participated in the first EPA Performance Standard Workshop, and I think there's another one coming up in July. So I hope all of you can participate. I think you can participate remotely, and that would, give you a voice and sort of clarifying and understanding, what, your thoughts about using secondary sensor data. Okay, that was a really quick overview of network design. If you have burning questions about your specific networks or scenarios you'd like to cover in more detail, I highly encourage you to go to the Network Design Real World Exercises breakout session at 1:30. And so Joe and Joel will be covering that, and I think it'll be really good for more specific scenarios that you might be encountering. So with that, I will wrap up and take any questions.
You just mentioned something to check out online regarding the monitors. It was maybe a link or what?
The plans, the annual network plans? Yeah.
Toolkits.
Oh, the toolkit. Yeah, I didn't put the link up, but if you just Google EPA Air Sensors Toolkit, it should, I guess I can't promise, but it should be one of the top links that comes up. And that, for years, headquarters has been working on this website that includes a whole bunch of information on, for community groups, districts, everyone. There's SOPs and QA documents and all kinds of things, and tools to analyze sensor data. So they also have some tools to help analyze sensor data as well.
Thank you.
So it's great, yeah.
I don't know why I keep having all the questions, but so it's my understanding the PM standard is coming up is going to be open for comment, correct?
Yes, yeah, well, yeah.
Is this an opportunity for PQAOs to solicit help for added flexibility for PM monitoring? You know, a lot of small districts are resource constrained, as you've heard, and moving towards continuous monitoring would be a big benefit, but there are issues that prevent a lot of us moving that direction, and I'm an advocate for it, even if, you know, one of the big holdups is, you know, some of them tend to read higher, which prevents some of the, I don't want higher readings, but it would be a more efficient, more resource savings method for monitoring. Is there a way we can provide feedback as a group to really push for more flexibility so we can add these monitors to our networks?
Yeah, so what you're talking about recently, Tim Hanley at headquarters, they are opening up the PM NACS review process, and so this is quite timely, and there are no guarantees they're going to, so the caveat is this might not happen, right? So the standard might not get changed and things might not, feedback might not be incorporated, but they are requesting feedback from agencies on, things just like you said, feedback on the PM flexibility for requirements or things you think don't even matter. Tim was very open to hearing all kinds of things about things that aren't useful to your programs, things you'd like to see, et cetera. So I highly encourage everyone to send him their comments. And I think, Kate, it might go out to the CAPCOA listserv at some point. There's no deadline. There's not a, so this isn't happening like in a week, but, so Kate, I think, is going to distribute to the CAPCOA listserv, but I think it would be great if ARB could come up with a way to consolidate feedback.
I agree. This is a huge opportunity
for
us.
And for us too. We're going to comment as a region on things too, so we also have the opportunity to weigh in as well.
Can you clarify whether it's only for PM 2.5 or also?
I think it's both. I think it's the whole PM, the whole shebang. Yeah.
So I have a second question. I've noticed lately more and more tribal agencies operating not just special purpose monitors, but SLAMs sites. And I don't know if that's a trend that's going to be continuing as those agencies, are they going to become their own PQAOs, or is EPA going to be responsible, or the other 4 PQAOs in the state going to be responsible based on where they're located?
I think that's a great question for Gwen tomorrow. But yeah, Michael can come. Michael works with tribes, but I do think though tomorrow for Gwen, I think that's a good question because it incorporates our QA. That question kind of incorporates our QA folks and us, and maybe Michael, you can comment more on the tribal monitoring. But
yeah, so EPA gives air grants to about 30 tribes.
only 4 of those tribes are approved for regulatory monitoring, and it's
Yeah.
been like that for some time. So while there's an increased, awareness around tribal monitoring, that kind of core 4 tribes doing regulatory monitoring, there's 2 in California and 2 in Arizona, that we've approved as being their own PQAOs, has remained relatively static for some time. And from our perspective, it's, we went through this exercise a long time ago. Well, I mean, a long time ago. 2013, I think, was the year where we kind of did a tribal assessment. And it seems like, moving from non-regulatory to regulatory monitoring is something that, we obviously, kind of have to think about, and we have a process in place. But in our mind, it's probably going to remain that same static at those levels for right now, anyway.
Really, there wouldn't be changes happening soon. It would require a lot of discussion. Yeah.
All right. If you guys have any more questions for Dina, feel free to email her. I took it down. Sorry. Let me see. Or stop her on our break, which is right now. So we have a 27-minute break. We're gonna come back here at 10:45. So feel free to get some coffee, pastries, whatever. Talk to your colleagues, and we'll see you here in a bit.